Do you ever remember being treated differently at all because you were a woman studying science?
Being treated differently, not in an explicit, obvious manner, but do you know XKCD? It's like an online webcomic, and it has one that really illustrates like sort of a feeling that I sometimes get, which is there's this guy, he writes some wrong equation on the board, and somebody sitting next to him says, "Oh, wow, you're bad at math." And then there's a girl who does the same thing, and then the person sitting next to them says, "Oh, girls suck at math." So it's kind of like there's always this stereotype associated with, you know, being a girl in science, and when I'm in a classroom and I'm like one of 3 girls when there's 40 guys, I really do feel like I'm representing all of like the feminine gender, you know, and that there's this feeling there, which it's not really like being treated differently, but it's like feeling differently.
When I started as a first year, they were graduating their first year of undergraduate women. So the actual women's room in the restroom in the chemistry building was a reconfigured janitor's closet. And so the facilities were very different, and they were not used to having undergraduate women in the university. So
I went to a women's college, so that was actually really nice. I think it's somewhat avoided that. Like, I've definitely heard from people who went to co-ed colleges that sometimes you feel a little weird if you're like one of a couple women in your physics class. You might feel like you're a little bit different. But at a women's college, there's never a question of like, are you not as good as this as the other people because you're a woman, or are you getting special treatment because everyone there is a woman? So it can be a nice place to go to college for that reason. I think if it were evenly split between women and men, that would probably be just as good too. Mm-hmm. But because in the typical college, women are very much in the minority in a physics class, I think for some women, and I think it would have been true for me, it isn't as comfortable as of an environment. So it's nice to be one of many women in a physics class.
Do you remember ever encountering any sort of negativity or being treated differently because you were a woman, either in college or once you entered the workplace?
Not in college. There really wasn't any negativity there, but in some of the civil engineering classes, I was the only female. In the workplace, especially as a younger engineer, I did experience a little bit of negativity, but as I grew more confident in my field, it's become less, I think.
At the intro physics level, maybe it's, you know, 1/3, 1/4 girls, and then 2/3 guys. But as you progress and you go higher up in the physics classes, it goes like, in a class of 40, there'll be 5 girls only. And that's just, you kind of get used to it, but it's still odd when you stop to think about it.
Do you remember ever being treated differently in high school or college because you were a woman studying science?
No, I don't. The nice thing, I think, is that I had a lot of good role models, and a lot of my professors growing up, even though the number of women in the department was small, the women in the department were very visible. So I never felt like I was part of a small group or anything.
How do you think the attitudes toward women studying science and women scientists have changed over the years?
I think it's really improving, at least in astronomy. If you look at the department here, if you look at the senior faculty, like Owen Gingerich, he's very senior. There's no woman faculty of his age, pretty much. Then you go to, for example, Professor Loeb's age class kind of thing, and there is 1. And then you go to the junior faculty, and there's 2. And we just hired a new woman professor. And then you look at the grad students, and it's 50-50, essentially. So you can really, if you look at the generations here at the CFA, you can really see the improvement. So in this junior faculty search that we just had over the past few months, I think 8 candidates were considered, 5 of them were women. So they were ranked, the top 3 were women, so the top 3 favorite faculty candidates for the department were women, so I think that's And it's not like they're doing any like explicit policy of affirmative action for women. It's just that there are more and more highly qualified women in the field, and I think that's very good. And astronomy is really progressing in that direction.
How do you think the attitudes toward women in science have changed over the years?
As more women are in the workplace, I think that, you know, people are becoming more accustomed to it. The men in the field are becoming more accustomed to us being here, and I think it just takes time.
When I started teaching my class, for example, I could go, the class met at noon, so at 1 o'clock I could go to lunch with the fellows in the class because they could take me to their dining rooms. But the Radcliffe girls had to eat up here across the street in the Radcliffe Quadrangle, which was a long hike from the Science Center. And I complained to the Dean of Students that this was not fair, and what would they do about it? And they found that one of the houses did accept women for lunch, and so they got an affiliation for me there so that I was able to take the women to lunch as well. And I think it wasn't anything terribly special for me, it just seemed to me fair, but the women were very pleased and they noticed. This is an interesting list, by the way, because it lists in order all of the PhDs from this department. Now we've had over 300 altogether, but back there in 1950, let's say, there had been 46 of them altogether. So let me go back through and count how many women there are. 9, 10, 11. So there were 1/4 of them in that from 1925 to 1950, and that was in the first 25 years. Now let's go to the more modern section and see how many we would find. 1960 to 1980. 7, 8. That's shocking, isn't it? It's
Yes.
gone down to 8 out of 100, 8%. So it's dropped from 25% in the first 25 years.
That's interesting. Do you have any idea why that is?
I don't know, they're admitting so many more students, but they were just admitting so many more men. Well, back in those early days, astronomy was one of the sciences where women could get employed, and it was they could work on photographic plates that had been prepared and brought in. But I am myself just as startled as you are in finding that statistic.
Why do you think currently there are fewer women in science-related careers or studying science than men?
I'm not exactly sure about that. In biology, there are very large proportion of women compared to in physics. Astronomy is better than physics in terms of the percentage of women, but even so, it's far from being 50-50.
And so I think it is changing, and I think it's just, one, you don't have role models. If you don't have role models, it's not something that you can see as a normal. It's not something that you look as normal. And I know within my neighborhood, there aren't a lot of female scientists, so just for neighborhood children, you know, what do you do? I'm a chemist, and it's strange to people. You know, they say you might as well be an astronaut. They're rare, but they're not rare.
Do you think there are any negative stereotypes surrounding women in science or scientists in general? And what do you think should be done to correct those stereotypes?
It's sort of interesting when my son was elementary school and he had to draw a picture of a scientist. And he draws the traditional wild hair male, you know, the crazy, and I'm looking at him and I'm like, well, you realize, of course, that I'm a scientist and I don't look anything like that. And his answer is, yeah, but that's what people think one looks like. And I think just the role models and to get out there and talk to people and to identify yourself as a scientist. Well, this is what a chemist looks like, so I think, yes, I do look like a chemist. And that is changing. Hopefully it'll be easier for you than it was. But I think if you have confidence in what you're doing and you enjoy what you're doing, then you can sort of tune out the rest of it.
You go to a field like history of art and architecture, and suddenly it's the opposite ratio of girls to guys. So I think because of those pressures and images, women might be more attracted to the so-called softer fields. And then I think another factor that's at work, and that I've experienced myself, is when you hit something hard because, you know, math is hard, physics is hard, and you're struggling because it's, you know, first semester of freshman physics, there's this tendency to feel like I can't do this, which is more of a feminine, like it's more of a girl thing in those fields, because all these society things all these things that you've been told since you were born is that, you know, guys are better at this than you are. So when you hit your first difficulty, you might say, oh yeah, I can do this, and a guy might just be like, what's wrong with this problem set? Like, you know, they might push the blame on something else rather than internalizing it as being incapable of doing it.
Do you have any ideas of what could or should be done to inspire young women to be more interested in science?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is role models. So in other words, appointing excellent researchers to faculty positions, female researchers, would stimulate more interest among younger women and would also demonstrate that it's possible to be successful. And I think that's the most important thing.
Did you have any role models when you were first entering science, women scientists?
No, I didn't really, and I think the going from Chatham Hall, you didn't have the negative parts going. It's not like, you know, you had to go in a class full of men to do your science, or you wouldn't get your date if you looked like you were smart or that you did something that was people considered male. It wasn't that I had models to follow, but I didn't have the negative, don't follow that. So I really could just kind of follow my own path.
One role model that I'm lucky to have is my own advisor. She has a great balance in her life because she has 2 young kids, but also still has this wonderful career in astronomy. So it's great to have an advisor like that who basically has like accomplished everything that I might hope to accomplish someday.
Do you have children?
I do. I have 2 boys, and balancing the work life and home life is a challenge. And you know, every family is different, but we just have to have rules about how we conduct our week. My husband's really busy, so you know, we just have to cover for each other, and I've got great parents and great mother-in-law and father-in-law that help us. But if I didn't have that, I'm not sure that I could do what I do now.
What do you think hinders women from pursuing science careers? Do you think family life plays any role in that?
I think the burden lies on the social structure in accommodating the needs to have children. And having children should be a task that is shared between men and women. I think it's the duty of the society to provide a structure that allows women to pursue careers as much as men by compensating, either providing additional supplementary salary that allows the woman to bring the baby to a daycare place, providing accommodating time on leave for either the woman or the man, and making it an equal partnership between men and women. And I think the American system lacks that accommodation. That's one of the main reasons that the fraction of women in sciences or in business is smaller.